Welcome to a new episode of Mind Your Mind. I'm Roxana Parra Sepulveda, your host, and today I am with Laura Love Petschl. Laura is a grassroots and community leadership coach and the founder of Between Humans, a social enterprise which is repurposing coaching as a social justice practice. Laura partners with people who are trying to make a difference in their communities and in the world. She believes that leaders' live experience, passion, and values are their greatest assets in creating social change, and that burnout is not inevitable. Through bespoke, accessible, and affordable coaching and workshops, she supports leaders' professional, personal, and organizational growth, helping to build their capacity to create positive, sustainable social change in their communities while taking care of their own well-being as human beings. Laura brings multifaceted, intersectional, and systemic lenses to the challenges of grassroots and community leadership and social change. In this, she draws on her years of frontline work and project management in charities and social enterprises, her business startup experience, her professional coach training, and her academic background in gender studies. Laura, welcome. Thank you so very much for being here today with me.
Hi, Roxana. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be having this conversation with you today.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for your kind words. And we have to say, I have to say that we were having a brief conversation before we started about your name. Because for me, as a Spanish speaker, Laura comes very spontaneously as Laura. So I will do my best to pronounce your name as well correctly, Laura. And if it comes a little bit like a Laura, just forgive me. But I am sure you may be used to this happening, you were saying?
Yeah, I think I now respond to both because I work with so many people where actually the Laura is the pronunciation in their language. So actually I'm really used to it. I'm getting to the point where I actually think Laura sounds nicer. So yeah, use either or both. I'm really happy with that.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much for your flexibility. And I'm super happy and keen to having this conversation today because you are bringing coaching to the grassroots and organizations and helping them to move forward, but also with the vision of keeping in mind well-being from the very beginning. No?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more about your journey as well into coaching and your current work?
Sure. So my journey into coaching really, I think it started with burnout. Unfortunately, my burnout. So I had been working in the sort of frontline charity and social enterprise world for about 4 years, and on the one hand, I was doing work that I really loved. I'd had this career change in my early 30s where I'd been working in a very different kind of world in the corporate sector. And now here I was doing work that I really felt kind of passionate about. I really cared about what I was doing. But over the course of, quite a short period of time, my stress levels just went through the roof. My anxiety levels kind of went through the roof. And it sort of happened, sort of gradually and then suddenly, as the saying goes, because I think this had been going on for quite a few years, but actually it came to a head when I had a panic attack in front of my 4-year-old son, who was very frightened by that experience. And that's really the moment when I thought, no, this is not good. And that was the point, I think, where I really sort of stopped. I had to stop and reflect on what was happening here. And I don't think I even had this language at the time. I think I've learned a lot about burnout and about myself in the intervening years. But I think, I was realizing that on the one hand, I was caring for the first time so much about the work I was doing. There was so much of myself invested in work, that was about issues and causes I really cared about. especially around gender equality. And, you know, that hadn't been part of my earlier career. I'd always wanted to do a good job, but I'd never had that kind of sense of connection, purpose. And so there was almost this kind of huge investment of my dreams for, you know, a better world in what I was doing. And then on top of that was this kind of, you know, this sort of work ethic around, you know, just do whatever it takes, put in as many hours as it takes to get the job done. But the problem was, and the problem still is with this kind of work, the job is never done.
Yes.
The job is never done.
Yes.
You know, I was working in an environment where I was, you know, solving problems for clients, and those problems were solvable. And here I was working on big social problems around gender and race inequality. And those problems, they were not within my power to solve. When you're then saying, I'm just going to do whatever it takes to get that work done, and it's never done, then you just never stop working. And I think that at the time, I didn't really see that happening because I was so, you know, enthusiastic to be doing something I cared about. But even the enthusiasm had started to disappear. I think that would sort of had waned. And I was then just like, I think I'd lost sight of even why I was doing it. I'd become disconnected. And so I had this really unpleasant experience, which really made me kind of realize I have to stop and reassess. And it was at that point that I had coaching. I found coaching. And there was this realization, it was not something that had been on my radar before. I'd never had coaching. I didn't even really think it was a thing. It was something maybe that they had over in the States and something that's a bit woo. And I was like, not sure about this, but I had it, and it was absolutely transformational for me. It was really important because it was the first time in my adult life, or in my whole life, where I'd really stopped and reflected and looked forward. I'd had therapy, which had been really important for me in building my self-awareness, my self-understanding, understanding the root causes of some of the issues that I was struggling with. But this was an opportunity to really look forward and think about, what do I really want? And I just hadn't had that opportunity. I hadn't taken that opportunity before. And at the same time, there was this recognition that this is an amazing thing that people should be aware of. More people should have access to it. They should know about it and be able to have it without having to pay huge sums of money for it. It should be done in a way that people can access it. So it's not, you know, kind of done in language that's inaccessible to them if English is not their first language. And also there was this recognition that this could really benefit other people working in the kind of work that I was doing, in this sort of social impact work, and particularly that kind of community and grassroots change, where you're working directly with people who are really impacted by some of the biggest injustices in society. And so I found a mission.
Fantastic. I mean,
thank you so much.
As
a coach and to go and do this kind of coaching, but making it accessible in these spaces.
Yeah, thank you for that candid recount of the process that you went through, because what I hear is that you went the full cycle, no? From that moment of doing and making that first change and investing, you're being so personally invested in a cause that you felt you wanted to be part of the solution, how that work ethics takes you so deep into doing as much as you can, because you want to be part of the solution, you want to see changes. And but also it comes with the clash, hitting the wall comes, that's the word that comes to mind.
Yes.
I'm sure you will find some other ways to describe it, but that hit on the wall, that the realization that the problems as gender violence and so many others that you have mentioned do not have a solution through one person. We need to be part of a chain. I call it a chain, like different people that we are interlinked and doing something at certain levels, in different levels, with different ways, and somehow contributing. And actually, that's the very reason why I started the podcast too, no? But is this progression that you were describing that comes with that realization, but also the increased disconnection from yourself, from your loved ones, from being in that place where you're just working hard, and somehow that process takes you into lose sight of yourself. I have experienced that myself too, get into those moments in which, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Something is happening and this is not feeling right. And that's the sign, no? That sensation, that feeling that something is not right here. You had a panic attack, which is a very clear sign that something is not right. And normally panic attacks comes to people that are very strong and that they have been working very hard and doing a lot to try to sort certain things. And that's the call for change. That was your call for change, no? And thank you for bringing the elements that support you as well in that process, because it's about self-awareness, and the fact that that self-awareness as well help you to find your purpose. And you found coaching, and here we are talking about the results of all that full loop of realizations, pain, concern, and so much more, for sure. No, but you have spoken about the value of the lived experience.
Yes, yes.
And how these can help us as well to feed through that experience, to feed the approach that we bring to our work with empathy, understanding, but also with a lot of care for ourselves is very important, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
With all of this in mind, what are the challenges that you have observed with regards to understanding those personal limitations? Because I think we are touching on that, no? On seeing where are our limits. We want to create change. We want to influence social change, but what are our limitations, and what do you see on that?
Yeah, I think that's, and it's interesting because you use two words there, which I don't know, for me, they have a very slightly different meaning, although they can obviously be interchangeable. And one of them is around limits, and one of them is around limitations. Because for me, limitations is kind of, and I think they're both really important to think about, like in terms of ourselves and the work that we're doing and who we are as people. For me, limits is something about kind of recognizing something that is maybe around, I think about myself, it's really around kind of what are my limits in terms of my energy levels. How much energy do I have? What are my resources that are available to me, both in terms of like my time, I guess also energy, but also creativity, that all of those, they're not boundless. And I think that's actually really important to think about, because that, that then makes us think, well, actually, if they're not boundless, then I can't just keep working just non-stop endlessly, because there are limits to these things for me.
Yeah, so there are boundaries.
There are boundaries, yeah, and I know we're going to get onto that. It's one of my favorite topics. But yeah, so there is a limit there, and there's also a limit around how much we can set limits around how much we are willing to take, how much we're willing to give, and how much we're willing to take. And I think there is sort of give and take, in all of the relationships that we have, whether it's with other people, whether it's with work. So I think that's limits, and then limitations for me means something around actually kind of my skills, my professional training, what it is that I'm actually kind of capable of doing in a safe and ethical way. And that for me is something which is maybe a bit more almost actually easier to define in a way than limits. Limits you almost have to kind of learn through like hitting them. Yes. Whereas I think limitations, it can almost be, we just have to be honest. We have to be honest with ourselves and honest with other people. And that can be really hard, I think, when we are, maybe socialized and working in environments where we don't feel like we can say no, or that saying no feels like it's unkind or not, fully helping somebody. Then actually kind of being honest about our limitations can feel sometimes like saying no. But I think it's really actually a really important way of working, as I said, safely and ethically, safe for ourselves and safe for other people. So to give an example on that, it would be, when I'm working as a coach, it would be around having really transparent and honest conversations with the people that I'm working with, if actually what they want help with is not something that is suitable for coaching, if what they actually need, for example, is support with their mental health. Maybe they actually need sort of therapy or counseling, and something that is, and actually they're not in a place where coaching would be the ethical and safe thing for me to provide, and I'm not trained in other ways of working with people, so it's very important for me to recognize my limitations, and I have had to turn people away and say no to them, and I do it in a very kind and honest way, and try to signpost people, etc. But I think that is also something that professionally we can struggle with, when especially if we're in a fairly nebulous role. There are a lot of people that I know who work in support roles.
Yes.
And they're not necessarily supported, or they don't feel like they have clarity on exactly what the limitations of their role are and the limits of their role are. And they end up doing everything and doing things that maybe are beyond their capacities and their capabilities. And I think, and that is a real recipe for, kind of harm to their well-being, and potentially harm to somebody else as well. So I think there's, we have to think about it from both perspectives.
Yeah, and the thing is that this comes from a very noble place as well, and how to become over-identified, for example, with a particular case. And that's why we're talking about having these spaces that are helping us to reflect about what is our position with regards to the people that we are working with, that our clients or service users, and that help us to understand the dynamics of the relationships and so on, which is a place of privilege, I will say, at this stage. For many organizations do not provide not providing those reflective spaces for practitioners that are working directly with people that are suffering and living, recovering and healing from very traumatic experiences, some of them. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's understandable as well that over identification, and that probably the difficulty to recognize the limits and the limitations, then, because what you're talking about also makes me think about what it is about boundaries and the limits and limitations, but as you were saying, in an intra and in extra, an external and internal and external side of it, because it also has to do with a level of recognition and the capacity to say no within ourselves, in terms of I'm reaching here a place where I cannot function with this. I need to have a second opinion. I need to bring another specialist. I need to do a signposting, etc. And that's why it's so important to work with partnerships. The beauty of multidisciplinary teams comes in that equation as well. So there is so much to what you're saying, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I was reflecting after our first conversation, Roxana, and I was thinking how much, coaching is the reason I'm still here doing this kind of work. There was a moment 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, when I just thought I need to walk away from this. I've made a big mistake. And it was coaching is the reason I'm still doing this work, and actually doing it, I think, from a place of much better health and well-being. I don't always get it right, but I definitely, compared to where I was before. And some of that is around coaching itself and the kind of the principles and values of coaching. But actually, some of it is that value that's placed on reflective practice and on reflecting and on supervision. Those are really important in coaching, as they are in any sort of therapy or counseling roles as well. And they're sort of ingrained into you when you're training, how important it is, both for professional development, but also for that taking care and of yourself, and noticing where you are becoming over invested into particular outcomes or particular relationships and so on, and having a space to step back from that and reflect on maybe there is other support that you need. And I think that those are actually practical things that organizations can adopt for anyone doing this kind of work. But as you said, it's a privilege, because we're talking about especially small organizations that are really kind of resource poor and time poor. That might just not feel like it's something that's possible. But I feel like there it's something that is necessary.
And yes, definitely. And when you're saying that, I'm thinking, yes, you have little budget, no matter what, include
there are ways
include that reflective space. Exactly. Absolutely.
There are ways of doing it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And needs to be done. Is a must.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because otherwise is get lost in so many aspects. And we know that this is part of the recipe for going into those places of burnout, no, when there is no space to reflect and understand. And the thing is that as therapists and coaches, as you were saying, supervision is part of our work, no, our day to day. We are used to these sort of environments in which we are reflecting and thinking about what we are thinking. No, is that element of metacognition, that element of having an helicopter view to what we are doing and how are we doing it and what is influencing that. And the very reason why is so important, I think, is a simple fact that we are human, you know, and because we are human, we are bound to be touched in some way by every single person that we work with, and as we do in our personal life, you know. But the people that we are supporting are triggering within us feelings, ideas, memories, reminding us of someone maybe, or creating some kind of energy that is somehow familiar. And sometimes those messages that we are receiving from our body mostly are so much into that unconscious level, into so deep inside us and inside our mind, that we don't get to fully recognize them until we give them a little bit of time and a moment to acknowledge them and to say, this is what I'm feeling. Where is this coming from? What is this about? To allow that moment to be able to understand then how those sensations, those feelings will then influence the way that we see the work that we are facing. So it's an interesting process that, we are stating here that is absolutely necessary. And we want to encourage every single organization out there to think about this as a must, to ensure some element of well-being is in place for the teams.
And on that, Roxana, just in case anyone's sort of listening to this and thinking, okay, well, you know, you've got a coach here talking to a therapist, and you know, they're sort of saying that in this kind of work, this is really important. But what I want to also just you know, kind of reflect on is that there have been actually some of the occasions when I think about, okay, when have things really affected me? When have I felt really kind of like I haven't been able to let go of something easily? I'm still thinking about it 2 or 3 days later. It's clearly kind of touched me. Those have not just been in coaching. So I do, obviously most of the work I do is coaching, but I also do work that is not coaching. I run workshops, I do volunteering work as well, where I'm working directly with people, many of whom are refugees or asylum seekers. And actually it's been in those settings where people have shared stories with me, which have really affected me. And now I have kind of the benefit, I suppose, the privilege that I have supervision, which I arrange myself. Like I organize it myself as part of my practice, and so I can kind of take all of that stuff to supervision. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that those moments can happen in any form of work where you are directly supporting people, and not just in kind of coaching and therapy, because people will bring those stories and those experiences with them, and often will want to share them because they are needing to heal and process those things. So I think that's really important to just kind of be aware of.
Definitely. Do you think there are particular challenges that you may have observed with regards to understanding those personal limitations through the work that you have done with organizations and frontline workers?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I'm trying to kind of unpack that in my head as you were saying that question. I think there are challenges around the narratives that are kind of at work, which can really, as I said earlier, I think can kind of make it very difficult for people to say no, to set limitations, to kind of define what it is that they are capable of doing and willing to do and able to do. And I think that's part of it. And I think, I mean, that's probably the biggest part of it. And then also I think it is, we people working in this field, generally, we're not doing it for the money. We're doing it because we care.
Yes, but it's fair to say that, I mean, also people need to have their income. I mean, it's important to be paid as well
it
for
is,
the job that we're doing.
Absolutely. And that's one of my kind of bugbears as well, is around how much people do get paid in the sector.
Yeah, but I think also we're talking about here a role that brings that personal element that is not all. I mean, I'm not saying that other people in other professions, in other fields, are not committed, because we come across committed people everywhere.
Yes.
But there is something about, I don't know, this personal investment. I think you were touching on those two elements that sound very important: the personal investment and the scale of the problem. The two combined, I think, have a big role to play in the potential impact of the work itself, no? And the material that people are working with.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, I mean, when you were saying earlier, and I think you picked up on some really important points as well, that there is this kind of, I think, you know, that we've got these huge challenges that we're kind of working to solve, or to, you know, make positive change around. But we're also working in a sort of a society which really values individualism, and which really is about individuals. You know, we do work in this very kind of egocentric and individualist kind of world, certainly here in sort of, I'm talking about the West here, and particularly in the UK and other sort of Western settings. And there is a sort of disconnection in there. And I was just sort of thinking about how, you know, you picked up on earlier in my story that there was this kind of, I was throwing myself at this work, but really kind of doing it like I have to solve all the problems myself. And I think that didn't just come from nowhere. I think that is something which we are surrounded by a lot, this idea that it's kind of down to us as individuals to kind of create change.
Yeah, I call it the rescuer within.
That
comes out in those certain situations, like the rescuer with a cape and everything.
Yeah, yes,
comes
exactly.
From within.
Yeah, kind of the hero that has to kind of, and I think, you know, and we're, you know, it's like society here certainly kind of validates and values kind of heroism. There's nothing wrong with people who are heroes. There are some real genuine fantastic heroes, but I think it's that individualism and that disconnection. And as you said, I think it's yeah, people are kind of that personal investment, and then maybe that, you know, kind of big social issues is really a problem when we don't have the connection. We don't have that kind of, maybe the collaborations, the connection with other people. You know, organizations can end up, especially some of the ones I work with, they're very, very small. They're very tiny teams of people, sometimes just one person, who are kind of working on things, you know. And even sometimes when you get to slightly larger organizations, it can still end up being kind of people, they can feel like they're on their own. You know, they're working with other people, but they're really kind of, this is the thing that they've got to do. So I think that's yeah, a huge part of this as well.
Yes, absolutely. And which also makes me think about boundaries. But boundaries, as we were saying before, that we were, you know, looking forward to talk a little bit about boundaries too, but self boundaries too, no?
Yes.
Combination of them both.
Yeah, it's funny, I feel like my thinking on boundaries that are kind of like shifts all the time. It's quite a kind of elusive concept for me sometimes, because on the one hand, I feel like some boundaries are really, certain boundaries, I should say it that way, certain boundaries are really important. Certainly they've helped me, and actually coaching has helped me to establish boundaries within myself, boundaries around what I'm responsible for, how much investment, how much kind of personal investment I'm going to put into other people's change and other people's outcomes. So those boundaries have been really helpful for me personally. but there is also this this idea around this boundary that exists between helpers and people who get help. And this is something which I keeps kind of popping up for me in things that I read and see. There's actually a fantastic TEDx talk, which I'll kind of share at the end, which I think really kind of explores this topic like so fantastically.
Yeah,
but it's
probably
this
we can add the link as well to
yeah,
the,
I
to
was
the
going to say, I'm
description of
gonna
yeah.
kind of tell you about it at the end maybe, and we can put that in there. But it's you know, this idea that we have a boundary between ideas of some people in society are helpers and some people are need to receive help. And actually, as I think we can both you know, attest to, that boundary is actually not a solid boundary. It's actually, you know, really kind of fluid and shifts and changes and maybe doesn't really exist at all. But while we have that boundary in place, we can have this sense that of rescuers, of people who are always giving, always helping, but not actually paying attention to the help that they need, and the fact that they also have needs and that they might need to ask for help or ask for support. And it also kind of creates this idea that the people who are maybe receiving help are somehow helpless, that they don't have anything,
Yes.
that they don't have strengths and skills and experience and expertise.
Exactly.
And I want to share like one example for me of where I became really aware of how this boundary is actually not really it's not real. It's not a real boundary. So I've been working for a few years now supporting a grassroots initiative which provides English conversation clubs in my part of London, in community settings, which are really no questions asked, completely accessible. Parents bring their children. It's absolutely fabulous. I've loved supporting them. I've gone along every week for 4 years. And it was very much like, I'm a volunteer, I'm here to help these people to learn English and build their confidence and get out of the house and feel less isolated. And then the pandemic happened. And I was a mum stuck at home with a 1-year-old and a 6-year-old who suddenly found herself really, really isolated and cut off from all the things that I was doing before. And the one thing I had in my week that kept going was English Club. And it kept going online. We moved it remote and we did it online. And suddenly I found that I was getting so much support from the women who were coming to it. And I felt less isolated for that 1 hour. And it was this realization actually that this was not a one-directional flow of support. This was very much multi-directional. And I was getting support from it and I was getting help from it. And I think that there are so many ways that we can see that happening, or that could be allowed to happen in frontline work, which really changes the dynamic, I think, between this idea of people helping and people who get help. So for me, that is a complication of this idea of boundaries, maybe, as being really like, but at the same time, I also think that it's important to have other boundaries in place as well, to recognize that we can't do everything, we can't solve every problem, and we can't work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 360.
Absolutely. And you make me think about the triple stance framework that we have been talking about here in the podcast as well. Some people may recognize it, that talks about context and how, you know, those boundaries help us to understand the context in which we are operating, no? That certain kind of interactions will be more appropriate in certain contexts than others. And then we can think about all the umbrella organizations as well, that comes with ethical frameworks that help us to think about confidentiality and when do we breach confidentiality, all those kind of boundaries that will give context, no? And also, for example, the setting that we have when we are having a conversation as a with a service user, for example, and so on. But also it is making me think about this idea of the sense of agency, and how do we, you know, work from a place of strength, basically, you know, to see the I think more and more we are realizing that it's so important to be in that place that you were describing with your example, you know, to realize that even we are supporting others by doing the job that we are doing something for ourselves as well. What is that I need, why am I doing this job, you know? And that brings an element as well of self-awareness into the equation. That's one element, but also to understand that the other has strengths. And the moment that we start to see the strengths and the capacities and the things that are working in the situation that we are dealing with the person that comes and asks for help somehow, there is a lot of empowerment there that can be shared, no, by taking responsibility, by mutually, you know, and so on. So there is so much more to what you're saying. I agree. I mean, boundaries have so much, and in the context of the well-being and taking care of us and thinking about what will be helpful for our own needs and so on. We were also touching upon the aspect of the internal boundaries somehow, no? For example, that has to do with time management, with the conversations that we choose to have with our line managers about the amount of caseload that we have, or, you know, to identify our stressors, our thresholds and so on, that also, I think, talk about the boundaries, because we tend to talk about boundaries, but what is a boundary, and what will be the elements that will help us to know that we are reaching that boundary, that we are touching that boundary, that we are, you know, or maybe trespassing that boundary, you know, and in that way, all of that requires that element of self-awareness, that element of let's sit down and think about it. And probably that's something that we could invite everybody to do. So think about what your boundaries are and how do they look like. More importantly, because we keep saying, no, things are very personal.
And actually I'd add to that, what do they feel like? Because I think you made a really good point earlier about, you know, actually you know, the sort of the felt sense in the body. And that was something which, you know, I really, again, you know, sort of it was really through coaching that I actually started to pay attention to my body. I really had never kind of, I guess I'd always, you know, I'd kind of grown up in academic settings and then worked in work settings which were very cognitive. It was very much about thoughts and thinking and sort of, you know, the intellect and the brain as a sort of thinking rather than as a feeling kind of organ. And it was really in coaching that I actually started to listen to my body. And actually now, for me, my markers of where actually I'm starting to reach those boundaries or those limits, if you like, around, you know, energy, you know, sort of energy and resources, but also values, you know, what my ethics as well, like what I'm happy to with and comfortable with, and what's actually not comfortable for me. And that's often a felt sense. It might be, you know, actually something around feeling tension in my body. It might be that sort of feeling of discomfort in my stomach, and it really is often a felt sense before it's a thought. And I have to pay attention to that. You know, I have to listen to my body. And I kind of wish I'd started doing it a long time ago, but better late than never. And
absolutely, 100%.
Right, better late than never. And it's never too late. But I think, you know, making those times, that is coming back to that point about reflective practice and supervision, and just having those spaces and times and opportunities, you know, at work as well as outside of work, to reflect, and how those can be facilitated and encouraged by organizations, and not purely put onto the shoulders of overworked, overstressed, you know, sort of people who are trying to do this work. I think those are those spaces where people can actually use it to check in with themselves and see what's going on.
Yes, you know, a very big question is coming to my mind. I will just say it.
Okay, say it.
How can we humanize the frontline work?
Oh
Make
my
it more
goodness.
human.
Human, make it more
Let's have
human.
a whole new episode for
Oh
just
my
that
gosh.
question, right?
I feel like we need to unpack the word humanize. It's making me
Yes.
think about like the name of my social enterprise, Between Humans, which really, I guess, I hadn't thought about it when I came up with it in terms of humanizing, but I think it is kind of relevant, actually, because the phrase came up in a supervision session, funnily enough, with a supervisor, because I think I was having a lot of, when I was a trainee coach, and I was having a lot of a difficulty letting go of this idea of needing to be the expert, right? Of needing to have all the answers, because this is something which, when you train as a coach, and maybe it's the same thing with counseling, I don't know, but when you train as a coach, one of the hardest things to do is to let go of giving advice.
Yes,
because we as creatures, we love to give advice. It feels good.
Sometimes
it feels good to
solicited or unsolicited.
Unsolicited or solicited, but it always feels good, right?
Yes.
To give someone some advice and feel like, yeah, I helped them. And actually, coaching is really firmly not about giving advice, and you really have to kind of unlearn that kind of advice impulse. And so I was struggling with this, because there's that feeling of, well, I want to be good at what I'm doing, and I want to help people and make an impact, and if I'm not giving them advice, then how am I helping them? And having to kind of unlearn that. So I was struggling in this supervision session with kind of wanting to be an expert and give someone advice, and the supervisor did this amazing job of supporting me to unpack that and see how it was really coming from a place of insecurity in myself, needing to prove myself to somebody. And she said, look, at the end of the day, coaching is just a moment between humans. And it really just kind of jumped out at me, because it encapsulated this idea that when you're working with somebody, I think whether as a coach or in any kind of capacity, you are sitting in front of somebody who is a human being, who has a lifetime of experience and skills and knowledge, and knows themselves better than you will ever know them. And you likewise are a human being who's sitting there with also a wealth of knowledge and experience, who knows themselves better than anyone ever know them. And what you have is, you have this moment where these two people are coming together. And these two worldviews and thought processes and sort of experiences are coming together in order to facilitate one of those people to kind of move forward. And I think that's that kind of like rebalancing of power between two people is a really, and recognizing that the other person that you're with has all of that at their disposal. That is really the kind of, that was the foundation for Between Humans. There's a name, and also it's a guiding principle for the work that I do. I come back to it. If I find myself wanting to be an expert, I bring myself back to it. But I think that is also, for me, what humanizing would be about. It would be recognizing the person sitting opposite you as fully human, and yourself as fully human at the same time, and working from that basis, rather than working from, here is someone who doesn't have X, Y, Z, who is this label and this label that's been ascribed to them, seeing them only through those lenses, sort of trying to step back and be objective, and maybe kind of to the point of being disconnected. That is the stuff that can be then quite dehumanizing, I think. So yeah, that's a great question. You said it was a weak question. That's not a weak question. That's a fabulous question. I love it. I feel like we could just talk about that.
Just talk about that, because that makes me think about what John Bowlby used to say about it, what I have read about it, and talking that he also talked about the human connection that we encounter when we are in therapy. And I call it the expert to expert position.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's my mean to label the power imbalance a little bit as well, within myself and with the other as well. What do you think we're reaching the end of today's episode.
Wow.
And that's also yeah, I mean, there is so much that we can continue talking, but purposely we do want to make these episodes manageable. We know there are many very busy people listening our episodes, and we want to also give them some inspiration, not only by what we talk about, but also through some invitation to act upon something. You know, action is a call for doing something that they may incorporate in their well-being repertoire, and start to use it, or at least test it and see if it works for them or not. And so that's the normally what we do towards the end of the program. And I'm wondering if you could share one activity that can be maybe incorporated in frontline workers' self-care repertoire.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I've got two things. One of them's really quick though, so I'm just going to say that I mentioned earlier about this TEDx talk, and I'll send you the link, Roxana. But the speaker was Zifa Afonu, and they spoke. The topic of the talk was why we need to reimagine frontline work to change burnout culture.
Interesting. I will definitely look at it.
I had the privilege of listening to them speak. It was a sort of TEDx London 2021, so it was all online, but it was absolutely fantastic. And honestly, it resonated so much and gave me so much food for thought, and was really influential on my thought processes. So I will send that link over to you. So first thing is to listen to that.
Invitation to listen that.
Listen or watch. Invitation to listen or watch that TEDx talk. The second thing, I want to come back to reflective practice, because I think that can sound quite mystifying, like what that actually is. As I said before, what I'm about to say now, I don't want it to let organizations off the hook for also creating these spaces and opportunities, because I think this is more than just individuals. This needs to be something which is, you know, offered. But basically what reflective practice could look like for somebody who is maybe listening to this and thinking that sounds interesting, but how would I actually go about doing that? And I just want to share that it can be as simple as asking yourself some very simple questions after you have had a conversation, a session, a support session, a one-to-one, however it is that you work, or even a group session, a group workshop. So any kind of activity where you've really been kind of working with, you know, a sort of a service user or a client, and you know before you rush into the next one, is to schedule, to allow yourself a few minutes of time, and to ask yourself, what can I celebrate from that session or that conversation? What would I do differently next time? What do I need support with now? And it can be as simple as asking yourself those three questions. Three questions. What can I celebrate? What would I do differently? And what do I need support with now?
Fantastic.
And I think those three questions, they can be in your head. I often just ask them in my head.
Yes.
You could write them down. You could write them down. If you're someone who processes through writing, write down, have a little journal or a little book or just in your notebook, and just, you know, answer with those three questions for yourself. And I think that, you know, that can be a really powerful point to just process and decompress before you throw yourself into the next thing, because I know there can be this tendency to go back to back, or to schedule things, you know, to as, you know, productive as possible. And it would just be to try this out, giving yourself even 15 minutes, 10 minutes if necessary, to ask yourself those three questions, and just keep doing this and see what happens.
Well, thank you so very much. That's fabulous. I think it's a very practical, clear invitation to use these three questions that can help you to start to work on that self-awareness and understanding what went well, what is actually working for you, and what do you need. Is that what I'm hearing as well? No.
Exactly.
So Laura, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so very much for being here and sharing your thoughts, your ideas, your experience, and bring it here and share it with all our audience. And if you are listening also, please, and you like what you're listening, please ensure to share it with your colleagues or managers and everybody in your organization. We never know who may benefit from listening this episode in particular. So yeah, the invitation is to give us a like or just simply share it. And we hope to see you soon. And Laura, for sure, our paths will be crossing at some point. So I'm looking forward to seeing you again. And thank you so very much for today.
Thanks so much, Roxana. Definitely. I look forward to it.
Thank you. Bye.